Welcome to Future Talk. On today's program, we're going to talk about some of the latest advances in brain science. My guest is Michael Merzenich, Professor Emeritus of Neuroscience at the University of California at San Francisco. Professor Merzenich has been a pioneer in brain science for about 50 years, and he's a leading figure in the relatively new field of brain plasticity. He's the founder and chief scientific officer of Posit Science, a company that uses brain plasticity to develop new behavioral therapies. He's also the author of the recent book, Soft Wired: How the New Science of Brain Plasticity Can Change Your Life. He's the winner of numerous awards, including the 2016 Kavli Prize. It's an international award that recognizes major achievements in the fields of astrophysics, nanotechnology, and neuroscience. He also holds about 100 patents. Mike, it's great to have you on the program again.
It's nice to be with you, Marty.
So let me ask you this. What is the ultimate goal of your research in neuroscience? What is the greatest thing you hope to ultimately accomplish in this field?
Well, I'm working hard with my colleagues to try to translate our science out to the benefit of people who struggle, or out to improve everyone's life, you could say, by taking advantage of this great resource that we all carry around within us. And that's the powers that come from our having a plastic brain. You know, we all have the ability, we all have the capacity to change ourselves, to change the very person we are, to change our capabilities for the better.
So is the goal to fix things that are wrong with the mind, for example, mental illness, or just bad habits?
Well, we're interested both in the normal individual, having a stronger, better, safer life. We're interested in increasing their resilience, so bad things are less likely to happen to them. But we're also very interested in helping people that are struggling because they have a brain that's damaged, or that's ineffective or distorted in its operations in some way that degrades their life.
What are some of the recent discoveries that have been made in this field that could actually help people?
Well, we recently completed a study. A study has been completed by scientists in which people who have been trained in a particular way, working on a computer across a period of a decade, have actually been protected against the onset of dementia. So this is a controlled trial in which people worked on a computer in the initial 3 years of the trial for a period of about 14 to 18 hours. And 10 years later, they were found, with that 14 to 18 hours of appropriate training on the computer, to have dementia about half as often.
So sitting on your computer all day is actually good for your mental health?
It's crucial that you do the right thing, that you train the brain, that you engage the brain, that you exercise it in an appropriate way. It won't come from the ordinary uses of the computer that you're up to, that you apply.
So is the brain like a muscle that you have to exercise by doing crossword puzzles and Sudokus and watching Jeopardy and things like that?
That's a very good analogy. You have to exercise the brain, but particular forms of exercise are important. And specifically, we now know that it's very important that you drive improvements in the processing of the brain at speed, under conditions in which you're improving the accuracy of the operations of the brain at every level of operation. So particular forms of exercise that we know contribute most powerfully to improvements of brain health and to increased resilience.
Now, are most problems with the brain what you would call hardware problems with the brain itself, or software problems, by which I mean the actual thinking process and thinking habits that people have?
They're both, but they're inseparable. So one of the most exciting things that we've discovered over the last decade or so is that the changes in the brain driven by your engagement of the brain in any intensive operation are physical. So you can think of it like your physical body, like your muscle. You can grow a muscle. So too you can grow the processes in the brain that contribute to its power. So you can basically carry the brain through appropriate exercise into a growth state, just like you can a muscle. The difference is that the changes that you drive are longer enduring in your neurology than they are in your action control in your physical body.
Now, this all sounds a little bit obvious. The more you use the brain, the better it'll work.
Right.
Why does it take a lot of scientific research to figure that out?
Well, people haven't understood exactly what it is that you need to do. So, for example, we've known for quite a few years now that people that have a magical ingredient called cognitive reserve, usually attributed to having a rich earlier life, are safer in older life from the onset of neurodegenerative disease, like Alzheimer's disease. But what is it that you need to do exactly, you could say, that confers those benefits? And one exciting thing that's happened over the last decade, Marty, is we have an increasingly clear understanding of what you need to do, you could say, to drive those changes in a brain of any age. And what you need to do is to exercise the brain in specific ways. And that's really what we're trying to do in the training programs that we apply at Posit Science. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people have a stronger organic brain that will be safer against the onset of later life disaster.
So what are some examples of the type of brain exercises that I could do to make sure my brain lasts longer?
Well, they largely focus on improving the accuracy of your operations in the brain in the most elemental ways that you're receiving information at speed. And then they also relate to your operating in more complex operations in thought, in which you're resolving information or going through very complex sets of information at speed. So those are the most powerful forms of exercise for driving these brain health related changes.
Sounds like computer games.
Well, computer games have an aspect of this, an element of these within them. And to the extent to which that's true, they're beneficial. Now, but they're not terribly efficient at driving these changes. I mean, we can construct exercises that are inherently more efficient.
Do some people need different types of exercises than others, or is it one size fits all?
Well, as soon as you start talking about brains that are distorted or damaged or in any kind of trouble, then the problems become more complicated. So you could say that the way you'd approach the helping an individual with any specific clinical indication would relate to the distortions that apply to that clinical indication. For example, we wouldn't treat a person with depression in the same way as we treat a person with schizophrenia, in the same way we'd treat a person that's suffered a concussion. All of those patients and another 25 or 30 clinical indications have been studied by us. We've attempted in a whole variety of indications like this to drive improvements in brain power, improvements in the operational capabilities of their physical and functional brain, and with a level of success. But when you get into specific clinical indications, then you have to differentiate exactly how you train to drive the changes that you need to target to correct them one by one.
Let's say we're dealing with something like depression, which is fairly common, usually not caused by any physical damage to the brain. It's caused by some kind of thought process which is poorly understood. So is there some type of exercise you could do to stave off depression? Whenever you feel like you're starting to get depressed, you perform this exercise.
Yes, you can. There are things that you can do that will reduce the probability of developing depression. And we know that from research in which particular forms of exercise have been applied and demonstrated to increase resilience or to have prophylactic value. So, and increasingly we are understanding how, in a sense, Marty, how to manage brain health. So in other words, I can monitor the status of an individual, you could say index the level of their indications that they might roll into a depression. And knowing that they might have a depression in their future, I can train them, engage them in ways that would reduce the probability that that depression will occur.
Does a person's worldview have anything to do with this? If a person conceives of the world as a bleak, lonely place where all activities are doomed to be ultimately futile, that might lead to depression, whereas if somebody sees the world as full of hope and possibilities, they'll take a different view, and maybe they could choose the way they see things.
Well, darkness is contributed to by chemical agency in the brain. So basically, I can weaken specific processes in the brain, and everything can seem hopeless. It can roll me into despair. And actually, I can exercise the machinery that contributes to that chemical agency in ways that recover it to normalcy. And when I do, things are bright again. So that's what happens in effect when you apply an antidepressant drug. You manipulate that process in a way that reduces the darkness. And only if you reduce the darkness is there recovery. Well, you can also do that, Marty, we now know, by training the brain, by engaging the brain in training in specific ways.
Now, does the chemical affect the brain adversely, or is it the poorly functioning brain that stimulates the production of the chemical?
It's hard to separate these. Both things occur. You know, in a sense that you're poisoned your brain is poisoned in a sense by the distorted expression of the chemical. But on the other hand, there have been changes in the brain that have led to that distortion in its expression. So they're inseparable.
Now, let's say a person has schizophrenia, identity problems, they have multiple personalities. Right. Let's say it's not caused by a physical problem. So you're saying maybe they have a little bit of a certain chemical, and if we could medicate them the proper way, then maybe it could be reduced. So you're saying medication is the best thing we've got to apply to many of these problems?
Actually, we've been training individuals with schizophrenia, and we've also been training populations of individuals that are at risk for its onset. It's quite clear that we can weaken the probability of onset for a person that probably would have schizophrenia in their future by training them. The brain is plastic, Marty. We can change the operational characteristics of the brain, driving it in a positive direction. Whatever its condition, whatever its state, wherever the individual is at neurologically. Of course, it's complex in the treatment of a condition like schizophrenia. Now, but no drug is going to really be able to achieve a true correction because the changes are very complexly expressed across the operation of the brain. If there's ever a cure for schizophrenia, it will be achieved not by pharmaceutical manipulation, but by driving the brain backward, you could say, out of the hole that it's gotten into, by changing itself in the genesis of the expressions of the condition.
Is it a matter of the person gaining insight into how the condition arrived so that maybe they can nullify it?
Well, you could say it's a matter of the clinician or the therapist, in a sense, helping the person and guiding them to drive the brain back out of the ditch. And so there's an evolution of this strategy. I mean, there are very wonderful experiments now being done in which this is exactly what people are trying to do with growing success.
Now, is this pretty much biological work, what some people call wet work, like you're kind of trying to figure out what's going on at the neuron level? Or is it more like understanding the thought process, like maybe people by an act of will can, like, quit smoking, for example?
Right. Well, we neuroscientists don't really separate the mental from the physical. We see the operations that we would describe as mental coming from the physical machinery of the brain. There is a biological dimension of it, a deep understanding of it that comes from an understanding of neurological processes. We watch the brain in experiment in humans and animals go into a ditch. We can drive the brain of an animal into distortions that are like the distortions that apply, for example, to psychiatric or neurological illness. We can create it by, in a sense, training the brain to drive it negatively. And then we can flip the switch, and we can drive the brain now back into a positive direction.
So in Posit science, I take it this is kind of a clinical practice, but to a certain extent experimental.
Well, it's being applied, these training strategies are being applied to a wide variety of clinical populations and individuals that struggle, but it's also being very, very widely used by individuals in the normal population, and they have either one of two sets of important goals. They exploit their brain plasticity just trying to improve their capacities and the qualities of their life. Every one of us can be more capable, stronger, better, more effective in our job, more effective in our life by training our brain in an appropriate way. So this is one of the reasons why someone would come to Posit science. But a whole variety of other individuals are struggling. They're struggling because their brain has been wounded, poisoned, infected, something else has happened to it in life, or it's been driven into distortion in what we call psychiatric illness. And there's a whole rich variety of those conditions.
Now, some people believe in affirmations. You stand in front of a mirror and you say, I am somebody, I am important. Do you place any stock in that sort of thing? Is that in any way related to what you do?
Absolutely. One of the strategies that's applied commonly therapeutically is, in a sense, to engage the person in a way that they positively self-correct. For example, if I have depression, I would encourage the person, in a sense. One of the fundamental ways it's treated is for the psychologist to say, every time you feel low, try to feel a little brighter, a little better, right? It's just that self-correction has power, but it's incomplete because it doesn't really recover, it doesn't really relate to the 5 or 6 other things that have been distorted in the emergence of the expression that actually underlie its genesis. And when you understand how to change the brain or drive the brain correctly more completely, you're closer to a real cure of the condition.
Now, a lot of the problems in the world are caused by people who have an excessive amount of greed or aggression or
Right.
hostility or
Right.
sadism or what have you.
Right.
So does part of your work trying to unravel how these traits develop and how maybe they can get undeveloped? Because sometimes people like having these traits, so they don't want to give them up.
It is a major focus of interest. And actually, the primary target we have in our research is in children that have the misfortune of having a terrible childhood. For example, real struggles, neglect, abuse, high stress early in life. Because most people that are grossly distorted in ways that drive them into behavioral distortion that are societally destructive or personally destructive come from such a life. And everything about what happens in the brain of such a child, we think, is reversible by engaging the brain in appropriate forms of training.
Do you see the personality as kind of a structure? The earlier experiences are at the base of the structure,
Right.
and the later experiences pile on. So if the initial structure is shaky, the whole structure is going to be shaky?
This is a great insight, Marty, because we now know that the person you are is a product of brain change. Quadrillions of moments of change have generated that person that you are with all of its understanding, all of its limitations. But, Marty, we also understand that it's a work in progress, that throughout your life you have the capacity to change. Everyone has the capacity, you could say, to drive their brain in a strengthening or correcting direction. And this is really what we're trying to deliver into the world. We're trying to help everyone understand how they could engage their machinery. This is a great gift we have, this capacity to change and change our life by changing our brain.
One of the areas that people often have trouble in is the area of interpersonal relations.
Right.
Not knowing what to say to somebody, not knowing how to show empathy.
Right.
Are you doing anything to deal with those type of issues, like a person is okay by themselves, but as soon as they're around other people, things fall apart?
We are in several different populations. So again, you can take children that are damaged in their young life. You can take children that are autistic and develop a very poor ability to control their social emotional side of their life. They have very poor understanding of social circumstance, therefore their life is full of social error. Or individuals that acquire this limitation from a disease like schizophrenia, where a person loses their ability to operate with social success. And actually you can train it, you can gauge it, and make a big difference. And actually see not just a recovery of their ability to operate, to make a friend, reconnect with their mother, or whatever, but you also see neurological recovery. You see the restoration of a much more normal operation of the machinery that accounts for these complex operations. It's plastic, Marty.
Now, do we have a way of measuring how well a brain works? You meet a new person, you can take a person's pulse, blood pressure, things like that. Is there any way to measure if the brain is healthy?
There's a rich variety of strategies that allow us to look in the brain. Some simple but powerful. For example, I could evaluate you in appropriate ways behaviorally. I could have you do simple assessments of a behavioral nature on a computer or in some other form, and that would give me insight into the state of your organic brain health, equivalent to the insight that you get from measuring your blood pressure. Or I can look at the chemistry of your blood, and now that's so sophisticated in looking at markers that relate to your brain that it would directly give me an index of how healthy your brain is, whether you need, in a sense, some form of brain training, engagement, or medicine. And increasingly, we're understanding how to manage health by using simple indices like this. So you go to the doctor now, and the doctor says, "How are you doing?" And you say, "I'm doing okay." You've just had your brain health exam. We're moving to an era in which things will be measured in blood, in behavior, and if it's important enough, we'll go to the next step. We'll image your brain in different ways. We'll look at your brain and record from it in different ways, and we'll manage your health with more certain knowledge about the status of that organic machine. Now we have no such medicine. We now wait for a disaster to occur.
Now, fixing mental problems is one goal of neuroscience. What about the goal of creating people with above average or maybe even superhuman abilities, more intelligent than ever before. Your brain becomes like a laser beam instead of a 60-watt light bulb.
Everybody's improvable. So one of the classes of people we're improving, that we can improve the abilities, operational abilities of, are very highly skilled professionals. For example, one of the advocates in the use of our program is the football quarterback Tom Brady. And why does he used our software when he was injured, and he discovered that by its use it improved his performance.
Performance on the field or mental performance?
Performance on the field, which is mental. I mean, substantially mental. There's a mental side to his physical operations. He has to make a quick decision. He has to see the whole field in front of him on the basis, and everything's in motion. Your ability to interpret information and make an accurate, fast decision is plastic. Anybody can improve their ability to do that by appropriate forms of training.
When you say the brain is plastic, does that mean that you can rewire it at will? So let's say you have a certain experience which triggers a certain response. You could, by your own act of will, change it so that that same experience produces a better response.
It takes the application to do this with efficiency of a particular strategy. This is the sort of strategy that we apply at training programs like those applied by Posit Science. I mean, it takes a particular class of exercise, a particular forms of exercise. The exercise has to be adaptive. It has to go from a simple level of operation to more and more sophisticated to be efficient. But we can drive changes in a brain of someone, even someone like Tom Brady, with high efficiency. We can take any individual at any level and drive changes that are meaningful to them in their performance. And the implication of this, Marty, is that by understanding how to control the power of this genie, we can basically contribute life improvement and performance improvement in every individual. And this is one of our goals. How do we improve the qualities of life of individuals in general, and how do we help them change their brains in a way that increase their resilience, their safety in life?
Now, how do you design these exercises? Do you just try things and follow it up to see if it works? Or do you start with some theory of brain function which indicates which exercises are most likely to work?
There's a massive body of scientific evidence now that defines almost every significant negative human condition. And certainly that defines or describes the basic operations of the normal brain. So one of the things that's been contributed to neuroscience is an explosion of fundamental information. So I could look at any population of individuals that struggle, and I can see from the description of the distortions of the neurology a roadmap about how to think about strengthening them or how to think about fixing them. And so that's what we do. We use the literature, we use this massive body of scientific research to define how we would approach correcting a brain that has a particular class of distortion.
Are there enough resources being applied to neuroscience? It sounds like it's largely observation, probably not nearly as expensive as doing research in high-energy physics, for example.
Well, it's becoming increasingly big science, and taking a big science form. And there are several big science efforts where the research is being conducted on a large integrated scale. But still, compared to, you could say, big science in physics, it's still small potatoes.
So is there any particular type of problem that you think is the most urgent problem for neuroscience to solve?
Well, we're trying to understand how to most effectively contribute resilience in individuals that would otherwise face end-of-life catastrophe. So we think we can detect, or you could say index the probability of onset of late life disaster, like the onset of Alzheimer's disease, the onset of Parkinson's disease, a variety of other conditions like this, well in advance of their emergence. And we think that we can increase resilience. We think we understand now what that magical cognitive reserve is, and we think we can deliver it to a person through a computer in an exercise or in other ways in life. That doesn't have to be by a computer. You could just change what you're doing in life, you could say, in ways that advantage your brain and your brain power. And this is part of what the future is going to be about. We now understand a lot about how to sustain our physical health our cardiovascular health by our lifestyle.
If you associate with people who are mentally healthy, does any of that tend to rub off on you? Can you get better just by being with people who are in good condition?
Well, to the extent to which they keep you lively and engaged, because the only way you can self-correct or improve is by being lively and engaged. So I've written about this a lot in my book because I'm trying to guide people to understand what their brain is asking them to do. You know, if you lived your life in an appropriate way to the advantage of your brain, you'd never have to worry about going to a computer and doing an exercise. And that would be much less likely that you'd have to worry about end-of-life catastrophe. So understanding how to live life to the advantage of your brain to continue to grow your capacities as opposed to accept decline and watch yourself basically go into the ditch.
Well, we probably will decline eventually. Maybe we could postpone it a little bit.
We can postpone it a lot. And we can certainly keep ourselves much more reliably in a safe position.
So what's your basic work now? Do you, is it mostly research? We only have about a minute left, so we're almost out of time. But do you like study real patients every day and follow up on them and say, well, this worked and this didn't, so we'll go more into this direction?
We have studies now underway, Marty, in maybe 150 university settings and or clinical settings in the world. And they're all designed to understand more about the clinical conditions that we're trying to help people overcome by engaging their brain in a positive, corrective way.
Now, some people know they should exercise, but they always find an excuse not to. How are you going to get people to do these exercises?
Because it will be medicine, and we know what people do. One of the great advantages of delivering training on a computer is you know exactly, in great detail, exactly what people do, okay. And you can keep them on task.
So I think that's a good place to stop. We are out of time. I'd like to thank my guest, Michael Merzenich, for being here today. Mike, great having you on the show once again. Thank you for watching. Visit our website, www.futuretalk.net. For Future Talk, I'm Marty Wasserman, and we'll see you next time.